What defines success?
Everybody's going to get knocked down in life, regardless of who you are or what you're doing. The question isn't how you get knocked down. The question is, how do you get back up?
What happens when you get knocked down?
It's only your good friends that you let that close to your back unprotected. And so really, it's usually your best friends that stab you in the back.
What makes some people radiate?
I really felt that as the founder and CEO of the company, who else believed in it more than I did?
This is Radiate.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Radiate, the show where we interview some of the world's most successful people to find out how they work their way to the top. This week, the man famous for guaranteeing the way you look, George Zimmer, the former CEO of Mens Wearhouse. He started the company 40 years ago with his college roommate and grew it to over $2.5 billion in sales. On this show so far, we've talked to plenty of people about their challenges, mistakes, failures. Well, 2 years ago, George went through a traumatic experience when he was fired by his board over a disagreement. Some of the members were his closest friends. George is back with two new companies, a rental tux company called Generation Tux and an on-demand tailoring startup called zTailors. In this conversation, George speaks frankly about what happened at Mens Wearhouse and how he's making his comeback, guaranteed. George has a great voice already. That
Makes you say that.
That is perfect.
You're going to like this podcast, I guarantee.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to like this podcast. I guarantee it.
I love it. So, George, great to have you on Radiate. I'm
Thank
really
you.
looking forward to this conversation. Okay, so, a lot of people look at you and they say, you've built this company, built Mens Wearhouse, and we'll talk about, what happened in the last couple of years. But I want to talk about the first, 30 years of growth of Mens Wearhouse. You started this with your college roommate. Like, how did you build this business into one that eventually had $2.5 billion in sales?
Well, I started with just $7,000, an undergraduate degree. We never had an MBA involved until much later on. And it was really because we didn't know what we were doing that we weren't discouraged by the early results. Because the day we opened, we ran lots of newspaper ads and did $3,000. This was 1973. And
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. And the next day, without newspaper advertising, we did $60. So that was quite a wake-up call. And that, by the way, is why it was not hard to talk us into going onto television instead of print, because print had a very short life.
Okay.
Whereas TV builds a brand over time. Really, the thing that I've always tried to share with people is that after having been in business for 10 years, you would think your company is secure and stable. And in fact, in the early 80s, there was a oil meltdown in Texas. We were a Texas company, and our bank loan was called. It was only $2 million, but we had to pay it back in 60 days or else.
Because they were seeing bankruptcies all around them with oil companies.
Every place, every Texas-owned bank was acquired by an out-of-state bank during this period. The bank examiners set up offices inside all the Texas banks to evaluate all the loans. So I was looking desperately to solve the problem, and the solution was that if I could find $500,000 of new money, another bank would step in and loan the $2 million that we needed. And I traveled all around North America trying to sell 25% of the Mens Wearhouse for $500,000. I thought this was giving it away because I'd been in business 10 years.
Right. And you had no takers?
I finally found a guy up in Toronto. I'll never forget him or his firm. His name was Wilfred Poslin, and he was the CEO of a big Canadian retail conglomerate called Dilex. And we had dinner the night before, and he walked me through a big Toronto mall and pointed out all the various stores that they controlled. And the next morning, I really thought we were going to make a deal. And when I said, I just need $500,000 and you can have 25% of the company, he said, you know, George, I really like you and I like your business. Make some money this year and come back and see me. And I said, Mr. Poslin, if I make money this year, I won't come back to see you at 25% for $500,000. He said, that's okay. I want to invest in something that's working. So he never made the investment. And at the end of the day, I had to get the money from my mother.
Wow. Who
got it from her father. It was quite a story. And that's what saved the company.
So you traveled all around the world. How many rejections do you think you got during that time?
Oh, not that many.
Okay.
Maybe formally a half a dozen.
Okay. But your business, you had been running this business for 10 years. It was a working business. It was profitable.
Right. And it made money 8 out of 10 years, all except the first and the 10th year. And, well, that's, I think, the way capitalism works. When you don't need money is when banks are inclined to give it to you. Mm-hmm. And when you do need money, it's usually difficult to get.
So what did that teach you, George?
Well, that taught me a number of things. Number one, it taught me that I ought not be so brash and cocky about everything, because I almost endangered not just the company, but all the people's careers that had been developed over a decade. But it also told me that my economic model probably was not the right model. And it was from that problem that we actually redesigned the economic model in the mid-'80s and adopted everyday low pricing, which is what got JCPenney's into trouble a few years ago. The difference with us is we were still a private company then, so all we had to have was the courage of our convictions. We didn't have Wall Street yelling at us every 90 days.
Right. You could make your mistakes.
That's right.
And you wouldn't have shareholders selling down your shares.
When your comp increases turn negative and are double digit, if you're a public company, you have real problems. As a private company, it's bearable.
So did you always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
Well, you know, people have asked that before, and I guess the answer is yes, because when I was in grade school, I ran the school store selling erasers and pencils for 2 cents to a nickel. And I really enjoyed the game of buying and selling and making money.
You liked being the merchant.
I did. I liked the whole mercantile world.
Mm-hmm. And so it felt natural to you. But did you start Mens Wearhouse in college?
I started it when I was 24.
Okay. What did you do before that?
I was a substitute high school teacher when I graduated from college. And then in 1971, I graduated in 1970, my father, who was an apparel manufacturer here in New York, recognizing that his son was drifting away from business, invited me to accompany him on a trip to Asia looking for factories where we might import into the United States. As I found out many years later, he had no intention of going on this trip himself and just wanted to send me.
He designed it for you.
And when I said to him, you know, Dad, I don't know anything about your business. How can I go to Hong Kong and talk intelligently to anybody? His response was, they're going to love the fact that you're my eldest son and you've come in my stead. And they were right. He was right. It was a successful trip, although I couldn't wait to get back to the United States.
Right. Do you like the apparel business? Do you like being in the retail business?
I like being in business. I love business, but I am not a clothes horse. So I can't honestly say that fashion makes me excited. To me, it's what we do. I've always said that we should dress appropriate for what we're doing that day. So if I'm here in New York interviewing with you, I'm in a suit. But if I'm sitting around in the hotel room tonight, I may be wearing sweats.
Right. So it's not like you walk into you don't walk into wherever like a Zara or a department store and you're like or even like a JCPenney or whatever and you don't go, ooh, I like this, I like that. You're just not. That's not what's interesting to you.
I'm not the merchant, and in fact, when I was at Men's, my brother was the suit and sport coat buyer for 30 years, so we were partners, and I let him be the fashion guy and make the trips to New York and Europe. And I just took care of the employees, the marketing, the finance, and the real estate.
So you like running a business.
That's right.
It's interesting because when you say that, it's just fascinating because, I so identify you with Mens Wearhouse. I think a lot of people do, right? I mean, they think about your voice, you start in the commercials and they do think of you as a clothes horse, right? I mean, they think of you as the brand, someone who's representative of the professional man, right?
Well, I believe that although I may not be an actual clothes horse, I still dress like a pretty good pony.
Right. Now, what was the decision? What was in your calculus for you to become the spokesperson of Mens Wearhouse?
Well, of course, we had been running television commercials for about a decade, so I was not scared by it. And I worked cheap. We didn't have to pay any talent fees. And
you're available anytime.
I'm available anytime. And I really felt that as the founder and CEO of the company, who else believed in it more than I did, and I thought that would come through in the commercial. So we simply set up a fake training class with 3 cameras, and I had the employees ask me real questions, and I gave real answers with 3 cameras filming it. And then we edited it together into a commercial. Many people have asked where the I guarantee it came from.
Yep.
And that was an ad lib because what I wanted to say as I was speaking in this ad lib context was I wanted to say, to reinforce how much I believed in what I was saying, a line that Bill Murray had used in Stripes, where he says, "That's the fact, Jack." And I edited that because I realized if I had said that, it would never run on air. So I changed it to "I guarantee it," probably the most trite expression of all time. But through repetition and consistency, I guess it caught on.
Right, exactly. It became the slogan that everyone identified you and Mens Wearhouse with. Have you thought about repeating that at all for your new companies?
Well, I'm looking for a new slogan that I can trademark. Since I started Mens Wearhouse in 1973, it has gotten much more difficult to get trademarks because there are companies now that are out marking all of these things. But I still, when I'm doing charity work or community work, I still play with the old expression. I don't use it for commercial purposes.
Do people ask you to say that line all the time?
They ask me less today than they used to. In fact, most people today think I'm the Dos Equis guy. I don't often drink
there's
beer.
a trace of that.
I don't often drink beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis. Stay thirsty, my friends. I love
George Zimmer, the most interesting man in the world.
And I love being that man when I go out and about now. People say, "Are you the Dos Equis guy?" And I go, "I am." And then, that's... And if I say, I'm the Mens Wearhouse guy, they go, that's even better.
Too funny. Now, when we continue on Radiate, George goes deeper into his dismissal from Mens Wearhouse. How do you deal with not only losing your job, but the company you built and the friendships you made? Radiate is brought to you by GoToMeeting. Think about all the time, money, and hassle it takes to hold a meeting. Our recommendation? Meet your clients and coworkers online with GoToMeeting because it's a smarter way to meet. GoToMeeting makes it easy to meet with your team wherever and whenever you need to. With GoToMeeting, you can meet from any computer, tablet, or even smartphone. No travel expenses, no hassle with traffic. Your team can join by clicking a link. No signups, no speed bumps. Turn on your webcam and boom, it's like being in the room. You can share screens to present, review, and get feedback in real time. Because with GoToMeeting, everyone sees what you're seeing so your team can get on the same page and get going on that project. So sign up for GoToMeeting today. Try it for free for 30 days. Nothing to lose. Visit GoToMeeting.com and click the Try It Free button. Do it now and have your first meeting up and running in minutes. That's GoToMeeting.com for your free 30-day trial. What was it like getting let go by the board 2 years ago?
Well, it was, of course, shocking. It wasn't totally unsurprising, but it was nonetheless quite a shock because since I was not just the founder, the CEO, the chairman of the board, but the television spokesperson, I honestly did not think, regardless of the disagreements that we had, that they would ever consider letting me go.
You were too identified with the company, right?
I thought so. And in fact, they preferred that I stayed. They wanted me to remain as chairman emeritus, which was a figurehead position. And that's just not something that suits my style. Mm-hmm. So I declined that. And then they immediately let me go and said, George, we've put your stuff in storage. And I said, my furniture? And they said, yes, your furniture and all 40 years accumulation of files was put in storage. And I've not been back to my office since. It's been 2.5 years. Nor
do they still have an office for you?
I think they put a ping pong table in there is what I've heard, but okay. I don't really know. And I've not spoken to anyone that was on the board or senior executives.
But they were some of your good friends, weren't they?
They were all my close friends, and that's what I think made it particularly difficult, very Machiavellian, and I reread Machiavelli, and it's only your good friends that you let that close to your back unprotected. And so really it's usually your best friends that stab you in the back.
But what happened, George?
What happened was very simple. I had named a fellow that I had hired as our neckwear buyer, and I had named him as CEO and said to him, look, I'm not retiring. I want you to report to me as executive chairman. For the first year, everything was fine. And then we started to disagree about the direction the company ought to go. Unlike what you might have read, I never imposed my will on the board or my successor, and they proceeded to make decisions that I did not agree with. So I began exploring the possibility of going private. At that time, Mens Wearhouse was trading for 4.5 times cash flow. And to my surprise, I was informed that we could give the shareholders a 40% premium and go private at the same time. When the board heard that that was on my mind, I think they saw it as dog eat dog and decided to get rid of me first.
Because they didn't want to do this. They were opposed to going private?
I think they felt that enough bad blood had already happened that not all of them would have been secure in their jobs.
Interesting. I mean, and I only ask you this, George, because a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs themselves, and they, whether they're looking to start a company or they want to grow their own companies, a board is on their minds, right? How do they put together the right board? And you hear this all the time, corporate governance or not, you want to put your best friends on the board, right? You want to put people who are going to support you. So at what point did you know that you lost the board? And would you have done anything different?
Well, I think that's a great point, Betty, because my board we were family, and I had known one of the guys since high school. So, I mean, these are people that had to make a decision to throw the founder out. It really seemed inexplicable, but they did it. I think what it says is that if it can happen to George, it can happen to anybody in business, and particularly in public companies.
And what advice would you give entrepreneurs who are putting boards together? I mean, what advice would you give them?
Well, that's a tough question, because I thought I had selected a board that was not primarily made up of business experts, but made up of people with good judgment.
You had Deepak Chopra on your board.
I mean, Deepak and I were very good friends, and we have not spoken in all this time. In his defense, I believe he may have been out of the country when this decision was reached, but he did vote to oust me on the telephone. So,
have you spoken to any of them since then?
Not one.
How do you feel about them?
I feel sorry for them. I think that what they have now discovered in a very harsh way is that they may have made a mistake. Now, it's going to be impossible, I believe, for people in that position to admit that they've made a mistake. So I don't expect to get a phone call anytime soon. But I think they feel badly because, don't forget now, a lot of the employees had a 401k and an ESOP that had a lot of Mens Wearhouse stock in it.
Do you still have Mens Wearhouse stock?
I do, and I sold most of my Mens Wearhouse stock, but in the most recent drop, I did lose millions of dollars.
You did? Okay.
And
the stock's down like 70% or something.
Yeah, and I guess one of the reasons why the employees of used to love me is that money isn't what drives me. I'm not bribable, and losing millions of dollars isn't as severe as the emotional joy in seeing what has happened without me.
Speaking about emotion, I mean, take me back to that day, because that must have been a pretty rough day, being called in and told that your furniture after 40 years is in storage. You're smiling about it now in a way because it's been a few years since it happened, right, George? So you can look back on it, but that must have been traumatic.
It was traumatic for maybe a week. The night I was fired, I came home for dinner, and everybody was very uncomfortable at the dinner table.
Your family?
Nobody wanted to talk to Dad, who now no longer had a job. And I finally said to my family, I have 4 children, and I said, everybody's going to get knocked down in life, regardless of who you are or what you're doing. The question isn't how you get knocked down. The question is, how do you get back up? And I said that without actually knowing how I was getting up, but knowing that I was going to get up. And that, I think it was Groucho Marx that once said, any club that wants to have me as a member is not a club I'd like to join. Right. So once people on a board decide they don't want you, it was not difficult to go away.
But it was so much a part of your identity, wasn't it?
Well, yes, it was. I think that I've become sort of this iconic person in America now. I actually believe that I have never been more popular than I am today. When I was just a CEO, I was just a CEO. But now I'm a wronged CEO, and I think that the American support for the underdog has been activated in my defense.
Totally. I love how you say that. Like, in a weird way, George, I mean, you were already very successful, obviously, as the CEO of Mens Wearhouse and the founder. But now you've got like a story to tell, right? I mean, you had a story before, but it's actually a more interesting story. I mean, I hate to boil it down to that.
No, you're absolutely right. Well, I mean, there are things about my earlier career that are not well known. For instance, after we went public in '92, I stopped compensating myself. Now, technically, I drew a salary, but I turned around and gave it in the form of $5,000 a year college scholarships to children of Mens Wearhouse employees.
Wow.
So in the last 20 years I was at Mens Wearhouse, I actually earned nothing. I earned about $10 million and gave about $10 million away in college scholarships. So you can imagine how the people in the stores feel about having George dismissed. It's incomprehensible, really.
So what's opened up for you? Because I always believe, like, in moments like this, right? Like a new world opens up. So what's opened up for you?
Well, my new business is really like God was watching this happen and dropped this in my lap. In 1999, after Men's had been around a quarter of a century, we went into tuxedo rental, and it grew into this $400 million business that was enormously profitable. So now my new act is I'm doing online tuxedo rental. So I'm getting the opportunity to roll up an industry using technology, much like I had done 15 years ago. So to me, it's, I don't know what could be better than that, really.
So when you were at Mens Wearhouse, though, were you skeptical, though, about online businesses? Were you skeptical about technology?
It wasn't so much that I was skeptical. It was that as the CEO, I knew how much of our store traffic was generated from tuxedo rental.
Okay.
Remember, you make 3 trips to the store every time you rent a tuxedo, whether it's a prom or a wedding or New Year's Eve. And so the idea of going online when we already had such a successful rental business just seemed like we might be shooting ourselves in the foot. So we stayed away from it. I think the lesson for entrepreneurs, including myself, was that was a mistake I made. And when you see something come along that makes sense, you better do it and become your own competition before somebody else
Rather
does.
than let someone else do this. So how are you acquiring customers? Because that's the hardest part about building a business, right? A consumer-facing business is, how do you acquire customers?
Well, we've got 10 different avenues to bring people into our funnel, if you will.
Okay.
Keyword advertising, digital advertising, bridal shows. We're going to be at a dozen bridal shows in January. And not only are we now looking for the brides, but we're also looking for wedding planners and other people who work in the wedding business. We've set up a auxiliary website called Style and Delight. So anybody who's in the wedding business can come to our website and get a commission for having the people in the wedding use our tuxedos.
Okay. So you've got, like, so as you say, you have 10 different ways to get people into the funnel. How do you get people going to your site to actually renting? What's the secret sauce there to get them to hit the button and buy?
This was something that I had to understand back when we began this. When you're in a bricks and mortar business, you have salespeople and customers come into your stores And if your salespeople are knowledgeable and friendly, you can do business. When you're doing it online, then the website has to act as the salesperson. And so we spent a lot of money and a long time designing a website so that millennial, mostly women, because 80% of the tux rental business is done by women for their weddings. It's done so that they will find it of value and interesting. I'll give you two examples. One is we have a mannequin on our site that can be dressed in all the different components of the tuxedo, different colors, different styles, so that the bride can get a sense of what it will look like.
Right.
The other thing that we built in was a way for people to track their weddings. One of the fears that women have is that their husband's friends who are going to be groomsmen at the wedding are going to ruin the album by not being dressed appropriately. And so one of the things that we guarantee is that will not happen. And that's why I opened this other business, zTailor, which is an on-demand national tailor network, so that if you have a need for a minor adjustment, whether it's a hem or a sleeve or even a strap if it's a lady's dress, we will send a tailor or a fit pro to your home or office or even wedding to make it right.
So why start this other company? So you started two companies. Why start two?
Well, they were originally one company,
okay,
and investors told us to split it into two companies. And the reason is quite simply that online apparel has surged in the last few years. And I don't know if you saw the movie The Intern,
yes,
with Robert De Niro.
Matthew, our producer, is nodding yes.
and so Anne Hathaway's business that she develops in that movie is all about fitting online apparel. And so what nobody really factored into the online apparel business was, well, how are you going to get it to fit? Back when online began, I used to think it would be great for videos and hotel reservations and airline tickets, but how would it ever work in apparel? People want to touch it and try it on. Well, it became so successful that, with a couple of exceptions, Rent the Runway and Zara, they send a second garment to try to deal with that problem. But there really is no substitute for a real tailor coming to your home or office and tailoring the product to fit you exactly. What the investment community said is that when the tipping point is reached, where all the online apparel retailers realize that they can avail themselves of a tailor service like zTailor, they felt we ought to have a separate company for people to invest specifically in that.
You know, it's funny because, I mean, I didn't really know the value of tailoring until I got into television, when I realized, like, my clothes really have to fit, and they have to fit well, and it makes such a big difference. A few, tweaks here and there really make a difference, in making your clothes fit custom.
I mean, everybody, and I'm sure I'm exaggerating, there probably are a couple of people for whom this is not true, but everybody has hanging in their closet right now clothing that doesn't fit and that they rarely wear, even clothing with the store tags on it that they've never even worn it once. So there are literally billions of dollars of apparel hanging in closets that needs to be tailored.
So, George, how old are you again? You're 67. 67, okay. I didn't mean to age you.
That's okay.
Okay, so 67. Did you ever think that, hey, I'll take my millions and I'll just go retire somewhere?
I tried for about a week. I sat in my backyard. I have a beautiful home in California, and thought, gee, I do play golf and I like tennis, but I only like those things when I'm doing them recreationally. If I'm doing them because that's all I've got to do, then I think I would get bored very quickly.
And what do you hope Generation Tux and zTailors become? What do you hope for them in 5 years?
Well, Generation Tux is really renting tuxedos and suits like the one I'm wearing. So I believe that we're going to launch next year. I'm calling this euphemistically now the Suit of the Month Club, much like Harry and David's Fruit of the Month Club. And I think millennials who like to wear suits to party and jeans to go to work would very much respond to the idea of renting a couple of suits, kind of the Netflix model. When you get tired of that particular suit, send it back and pick out another one.
So a subscription service.
Exactly.
Okay. That's interesting.
So I think that's something that, it's not going to happen in a significant way next year. But I think if you look out 5 years, it may become the way people acquire clothing, much like Airbnb or Uber.
Next week on Radiate, one of the people who pioneered venture investing, Alan Patrikoff. He's helped build some of the best-known companies, including AOL, Office Depot, and a little company called Apple Computer. His firm Graycroft is now invested in some of the hottest startups, including Venmo, Munchery, and many more. Hear his story and what advice he's got for the budding entrepreneur in you. Thanks for joining us. I'm Betty Lou. If you like what you heard, please review and subscribe to us on iTunes, and find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. See you next week on Radiate.